As the wedding celebration reaches its peak, laughter and music spill from the grand ballroom into the night. Inside, guests dance in shimmering gowns and tailored suits, their glasses brimming with the finest champagne. The bride and groom, symbols of wealth and prestige, bask in the glow of admiration. Beyond the towering walls of the ballroom, Aurora pulls her tattered coat tighter around her shoulders. She watches the glowing windows above, her heart tightening with the memories of a life that once felt so secure. The scent of rich food drifts down, a cruel reminder of what she has lost. Suddenly, the back door of the venue swings open, and a young waiter steps outside, setting down a tray of untouched food before lighting a cigarette. Aurora hesitates, but hunger wins over pride. She reaches for the discarded bread roll, only to freeze when a familiar voice calls her name. Aurora! She turns sharply, eyes widening as she recognizes Sebastian Sinclair, the groom. A childhood friend, once an inseparable part of her world, now a stranger in a life she no longer belongs to. His face is a mixture of shock and disbelief. What happened to you? Sebastian stammers, stepping closer. Aurora swallows the lump in her throat. Life happened. Inside, the orchestra swells, and his bride calls his name. He hesitates, torn between the warmth of his privileged world and the bitter reality before him. Let me help you, Sebastian offers, his voice low. But Aurora shakes her head, her pride flaring despite her desperation. I don't belong in your world anymore. And with that, she turns and disappears into the night, leaving Sebastian standing at the threshold between past and present, divided by more than just wealth but by fate itself. Sebastian lingers at the threshold, his heart pounding. The sound of his name, his bride's voice, snaps him back to the present. He turns toward the ballroom, his mind racing. Aurora. Here. Like this. Inside, the wedding continues, dazzling and perfect. His bride, Evelyn, loops her arm through his, whispering, "Where did you go?" He forces a smile, but his mind is elsewhere on the girl outside, the girl he once knew. Meanwhile, Aurora vanishes into the cold streets. She has long since accepted her fate, yet seeing Sebastian reignites something within her, a reminder of the life stolen from her. She tightens her fists. I won't let this be the end of me. She makes her way to the only place that still holds echoes of her past, an abandoned townhouse, once her family's, now empty and forgotten. She climbs through a broken window and curls up in the corner, where the scent of old wood and faded perfume lingers. But she is not alone. Didn't expect to see a Sinclair's princess in a place like this, a voice murmurs from the shadows. Aurora stiffens. A figure steps into the moonlight, a man in tattered but well-kept clothes, his sharp gaze assessing her. Who are you? She asks, her voice wary. He smirks. Someone who knows what it's like to fall from grace. His name is Cashin, once a notorious investor, now a ghost in the city's underbelly. He's heard rumors about her family's downfall. And now, he sees an opportunity. You want your life back. Cashin leans in. I can help you. But it won't be easy. Aurora looks at him, the weight of hunger, loss, and anger pressing on her shoulders. For the first time in a long while, she feels something close to hope. I'm listening. Sebastian, unable to shake his encounter with Aurora, begins searching for her in secret, questioning what truly matters in his world of luxury. Aurora, guided by Cashin, learns the art of deception, negotiation, and power, determined to reclaim her place in high society. But the deeper she goes, the more she realizes that revenge may not be enough. As their paths intertwine once more, the divide between them grows ever thinner until one final confrontation will force them to choose the world they know or the unknown future they could create. Aurora tightened her grip on the ring, her knuckles turning white. The dim light of the pawn shop cast long shadows across the cluttered glass display cases, reflecting off tarnished silverware, dusty watches, and forgotten trinkets. The air smelled of aged metal and something musty, like old regrets hanging in the air. The shop owner, a weary-looking man with deep-set eyes and a salt-and-pepper beard, leaned on the counter, unimpressed by her hesitation. Listen, lady, I'm not trying to cheat you. Gold's not worth what it used to be, and I've seen 3 people just today trying to pawn their grandmother's jewelry. He gestured toward a small pile of rings on the counter. If you change your mind, my offer stands. Aurora swallowed hard. She had expected this. Still, The idea of parting with the ring for so little something that had meant everything to the woman who had worn it before her felt like a betrayal. "No," she said finally, slipping it back into her coat pocket. "I'll find another way." The shop owner sighed but didn't argue. She turned on her heel and pushed out into the cold night. The wind bit at her skin as she wrapped her coat tighter around herself. The city was unkind at this hour, dark alleys and neon lights, the smell of rain on concrete. She glanced down the street, uncertainty gnawing at her. Rent was due. Her stomach was empty. The ring might have been her only salvation, but something inside her refused to let go. A voice cut through the night. "That must be something special if you're willing to walk away from cash." Aurora turned sharply, heart pounding. A man leaned casually against a lamppost, his coat collar pulled up against the chill. His eyes flickered with curiosity, or was it something else? She took a step back. "Who are you?" He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just someone who knows desperation when he sees it." His gaze dropped meaningfully to her coat pocket. "And maybe someone who has a better deal for you." Aurora hesitated, her fingers curling protectively around the ring. "Think about it," the man continued smoothly. "Pawnshops give you scraps. But I know someone who pays for things with sentimental value." Her breath caught. The ring wasn't just gold, it was history, a memory, a connection to a past she barely understood. And now it seemed something more. Aurora's pulse quickened. Every instinct told her to turn and walk away, but she remained rooted in place, staring at the man. His presence was unsettling, yet he hadn't made a move toward her. "And what exactly does your someone do with sentimental things?" she asked warily. The man smirked. "That depends on what kind of sentiment they carry." A shiver ran down her spine. The way he spoke, it wasn't about money. This wasn't just another collector looking for rare jewelry. He was talking about something else, something deeper. "I'm not interested," she said, tightening her coat around her and stepping away. "Suit yourself." He shrugged, pushing off the lamppost. "But if you change your mind, ask for Ezra at the Blue Orchid." Aurora didn't reply. She turned and walked away, her boots clicking against the wet pavement. Every step put distance between her and the strange man, but his words clung to her, lingering like smoke in the cold air. The Blue Orchid. She'd heard of it before, a bar on the outskirts of the city. Seedy. Dangerous. A place where desperate people went when they had nowhere else to turn. She slipped a hand into her pocket, feeling the smooth surface of the ring. She could still pawn it, still take the safe way out. But something about Ezra's words gnawed at her. Sentimental value. What did he know? What did he want? And why did she feel like this ring was worth more than she had ever realized? As she reached the worn steps of the rundown apartment she called home, she made a choice. Tomorrow, she would go to the Blue Orchid. And she would find out exactly what Ezra meant. As Aurora listens to Victor's tale, she's drawn into his world, one of quiet resilience and unspoken camaraderie. He leads her through winding alleyways to a dimly lit basement where the barter system thrives. Trinkets, old letters, and cherished keepsakes line makeshift stalls, exchanged for meals and shelter. Aurora, hesitant at first, clutches a locket from her childhood. She isn't sure she's ready to part with it, but the hunger gnawing at her stomach makes the decision for her. As she trades it for a warm bowl of stew, she catches Victor watching her with knowing eyes. "Every item has a story," he murmurs. "And every trade carries a price." Unbeknownst to them, Aurora's past is catching up. The locket isn't just any keepsake, it holds a secret that someone dangerous is looking for. Aurora turns the locket over in her fingers one last time before handing it to an old woman behind the counter. In exchange, she receives a steaming bowl of stew and a thick slice of bread. The warmth seeps into her bones as she eats, but a hollow feeling lingers in her chest. That locket was the last thing she had from her mother. Victor watches her carefully, sensing her hesitation. "You don't have to stay here," he says. "But if you do, you should know the rules." Aurora swallows the last bite of bread and leans in. "What rules?" He gestures around the dimly lit room. "No trades can be undone. No one asks where something came from. And most importantly," his voice lowers, "don't make trades with the wrong people." She frowns. "Who are the wrong people?" Before Victor can answer, a commotion erupts near the back of the room. A man in a tattered coat slams his fist against the counter, demanding something back. "I didn't know what it was worth," he shouts. "Please, I need it." The old woman behind the counter shakes her head. "A trade is a trade." The man's shoulders slump, his desperation palpable. But as he turns away, his eyes lock onto Aurora's. There's something unsettling in his gaze, something that makes her shiver. Victor tugs at her sleeve. "We should go." As they weave through the narrow corridors, Aurora can't shake the feeling that she stepped into something much bigger than a simple barter system. And when she catches a glimpse of the old woman slipping her locket into a hidden compartment beneath the counter, a single thought takes root in her mind. She needs to get it back.
Aurora tightened her grip around the ring as she turned away from the merchant's stall, the dim glow of lanterns casting flickering shadows across the underground market. The scent of sizzling meat and fresh bread taunted her empty stomach, but the thought of giving up the last connection to her past for a single meal made her stomach twist even tighter. She wandered through the narrow alleyways, where traders whispered behind makeshift counters, exchanging items with knowing glances. It was a world built on survival, where sentiment had no value, only what could fill a stomach or buy warmth. Victor caught up to her, his steps light and effortless, as if he belonged to this world in a way she never could. "Not enough?" he asked, reading the frustration in her expression. She shook her head. "A single meal. That's all they think it's worth." Victor let out a low whistle. "Either they think you're desperate, or they see something you don't." Aurora's fingers curled around the cool metal of the ring in her palm. Was it truly worthless here? Or did someone recognize its value and want to take advantage of her? Victor studied her before tilting his head toward a shadowy corner. "There's another way to trade," he said carefully. "Riskier. But it could get you more." Her heart pounded. "How risky?" He gave a half smile. "Depends on how good you are at bluffing." Aurora hesitated. She had never been a gambler. But as she looked back at the merchant stalls, at the people bartering their last possessions for scraps, she realized she was already losing. "Show me," she said. Victor grinned, motioning for her to follow. As they slipped deeper into the market's hidden layers, Aurora wondered if she had just made her first real choice or her first real mistake. Victor led Aurora through a maze of winding alleyways, deeper into the underground market than she had dared to venture before. The sounds of haggling and bartering faded behind them, replaced by murmured conversations and the occasional clink of glass. They stopped in front of a rusted metal door, barely visible in the dim lighting. Victor knocked twice, then once more after a pause. A metal slot slid open, revealing a pair of sharp, scrutinizing eyes. "What's the trade?" the voice behind the door asked. Victor glanced at Aurora before answering. "She's got something valuable." The eyes shifted to her, scanning her from head to toe. For a moment, she considered lying, but before she could, Victor gently nudged her forward. "I want something more than a meal for this," she said, holding up the ring. The slot closed with a clang. A tense silence stretched between them before the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room lined with crates, trinkets, and items that seemed out of place in a market built on survival. Fine jewelry, rare books, even old-world electronics, things that shouldn't exist in a place where people traded for scraps. A man sat behind a small table, hands folded in front of him. His suit was worn but well-kept, a stark contrast to the rest of the underground world. A scar ran from his brow to his jaw, giving him an almost unreadable expression. He motioned for them to sit. "Let's see it." Aurora hesitated before slipping the ring off her finger, placing it on the table. The man picked it up, turning it between his fingers with practiced ease. "This isn't just a ring," he murmured. Her breath caught. "You recognize it?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I recognize the crest engraved inside. It belonged to someone important." Victor tensed beside her. "What kind of important?" The man gave a slow smile. "The kind that could either make you very rich, or very dead." Aurora swallowed hard. She had thought the ring was just a keepsake, a final remnant of the life she had left behind. But if it meant something more, something dangerous, what did that mean for her? She glanced at Victor, her mind racing. "What's your offer?" she asked. The man leaned back, his eyes gleaming with something between amusement and calculation. "That depends," he said. "Are you looking to trade, or looking for the truth?" Aurora lay in the cold darkness of the abandoned building, the harsh reality of her hunger gnawing at her. She hadn't eaten in days. The once gleaming city had turned into a labyrinth of shadows, and she had wandered through it, searching for any sign of hope. But the streets offered nothing but harsh faces and empty promises. Her fingers wrapped around the cold metal ring in her pocket, her last possession, a symbol of a life she could no longer afford. It had been a gift once, from someone who had believed in her dreams. Now, it was a weight, a reminder of how far she had fallen. As she stared at it, her stomach clenched painfully, and her mind swirled with the cruelty of her situation. Suddenly, the impulse to survive overtook her. The ring had no worth beyond sentimentality. It was beautiful, yes, but what good was beauty when it could not fill the emptiness inside her? With shaking hands, she brought the ring to her lips. The cold metal seemed to mock her hesitation. She was alone. No one would save her. Not now. And so, with a fierce look in her eyes, Aurora swallowed the ring. It slid down her throat like a bitter pill, and she could almost feel the weight of her decision settle in her chest. It was not just an act of desperation. It was an act of defiance, a refusal to let her circumstances define her. The ring was gone, but it had become something else, a final challenge to her own sense of worth. Hours passed before she felt anything other than emptiness. Then, it started a faint warmth deep in her core. It wasn't hunger, it was something else. Aurora's mind began to race. Had she just done something irrevocable? Or had she unlocked something? She felt a strange sense of power surging within her, as if the ring had somehow become a catalyst, igniting something in her. Aurora forced herself to her feet. Her body trembled, but there was a new fire in her eyes. She didn't know what was happening, but she wasn't going to wait around to find out. She had a feeling that this was only the beginning her survival, her strength, it was all changing. With a renewed sense of purpose, Aurora pushed through the crumbling door of the building and into the night. The world was still unforgiving, but something deep inside her had shifted. She wasn't the same broken woman who had walked into that building hours ago. She had a new hunger now, one for something greater than mere survival. She didn't know where the road would take her, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The ring might be gone, but in its place, something stronger had taken root. And Aurora, for the first time in a long while, was ready to face whatever came next. Victor's thoughts drifted back to the moment when he had first met Aurora, when her vibrant energy had captivated him despite all the walls he had built around his heart. He hadn't known it then, but she had become his anchor, a fragile hope that kept him from sinking too deep into the darkness of his own past. He could still see the desperate look in her eyes when she had reached out to him, searching for something more. That was before the barter had gone wrong. "I'll keep her here for as long as it takes," Victor said, his voice firm now, as though the words solidified his resolve. "But I don't know if she can survive this. Not just the poison. I don't know what else she's running from, what else is chasing her." The doctor's expression softened, and for the first time, a shadow of empathy crossed his face. "You're right. There's more. People like her, they don't end up in the underground market for nothing. They're running from something darker, something more dangerous than we can imagine. The real question is, does she have the strength to face it? Or will it swallow her whole?" Victor looked at the doctor, a flicker of something igniting in his chest. "I won't let it. I'll help her face whatever it is. We'll face it together." The doctor watched him for a long moment, his gaze intense, before nodding. "Very well. But remember, survival isn't always about winning. Sometimes, it's about surviving the fight long enough to rebuild. I hope she has it in her." As the doctor finished speaking, a low groan escaped Aurora's lips. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, and she blinked, confused, as she took in her surroundings. "Victor," she whispered, her voice weak but unmistakable. Victor immediately stood by her side, his heart racing with relief. "Aurora, you're awake. You're safe now. How do you feel?" She tried to lift her hand, but her body seemed too heavy. "What happened? Where am I?" "You're at a clinic. You collapsed, someone tried to hurt you," Victor explained softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But you're going to be okay. You're going to make it through this? Her eyes fluttered as she tried to sit up, but Victor gently pressed her back down. Breath. You need it? Aurora's breath hitched slightly, a troubled look crossing her face. She gripped Victor's hand weakly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring this trouble to you. But Victor shook his head, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a comforting gesture. You didn't bring this on yourself, Aurora. You've been running from something, but it's not your fault. You're here now, and that's what matters. Aurora closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat as if trying to keep tears at bay. I thought I could escape it all, she whispered, her voice cracking. But I don't know how to anymore. Victor's heart twisted at her words. He knew that feeling too well the hopelessness that came with being cornered by the very world you thought you could outrun. But in that moment, as he held her hand, he realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. Together, they might have a chance to fight back, to find a way to break free from the chains that bound them both. You don't have to escape alone anymore, Victor whispered back, his voice steady. I'm here, and I'll help you find a way out. Aurora's eyes fluttered open to the soft sound of birdsong outside the small window of the room she had come to rest in. Her head felt heavy, and her body was sore, but there was a warmth in her chest that hadn't been there before. Victor was sitting by her side, his face a mix of concern and relief. You're awake, he said quietly, his voice like a breath of fresh air. I didn't leave. I promised I wouldn't. Aurora managed a weak smile. It had been days since she had collapsed, her body ravaged by hunger, her spirit broken. But somehow, she had survived thanks to Victor's unshakable determination to keep her alive. The doctor entered, a middle-aged woman with a kind but serious expression. She took one look at Aurora and nodded approvingly. You're strong, she said, but survival isn't just about food. It's about reclaiming your dignity. You've been through more than most will ever know, but it's time to rebuild. You can't live on scraps of what you were. You need to remember who you are. The words struck deep, and for the first time since her life had fallen apart, Aurora felt a flicker of hope. Dignity. It seemed so simple, yet so elusive. Victor stood up, his eyes never leaving Aurora. We need to do more than just survive. We need to help others who are where we were lost, forgotten, struggling. We can't be the only ones who find a way out of this. Aurora nodded, her heart swelling with purpose. The world seemed so cruel, but Victor was right. They couldn't be the only ones to break free. There were others out there who needed the same kind of help they had found in each other. Together, they set out to create something bigger, a network for the forgotten. They found abandoned buildings, empty spaces in the city where people could gather without fear of judgment. They began sharing food, supplies, and most importantly, their stories. Slowly but surely, others came to them, people who had nowhere else to turn. They came seeking not just food, but a chance to stand tall again, to restore the dignity they had lost. Victor and Aurora became the heart of this movement. They didn't just provide shelter and food, they offered something far more valuable, a sense of belonging, of worth, of hope. They organized meetings, taught people new skills, and even started a small barter system where people could trade whatever they had, whether it was a skill, a small item, or a piece of advice. As the weeks passed, the group grew. The forgotten began to find each other, form bonds, and build lives that had seemed impossible just months before. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks, but there was something magical in the air, something that spoke of resilience and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to be silenced. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the city, Aurora and Victor stood together on the roof of the building that had become their headquarters. The sounds of the city pulsed around them, but there was a quiet peace in their hearts. You think we've done enough? Aurora asked, her voice soft but steady. Victor turned to her, his face illuminated by the fading light. We've just begun. And as they looked out over the city, they knew that together, they could change the world one forgotten person at a time. The days blended together as Victor and Aurora worked tirelessly to expand their network. They built relationships with local businesses, people who were once too afraid to speak up now approached them for guidance, and even those from wealthier parts of the city began to offer help, wanting to be part of the change. Their small movement started to turn into a revolution of sorts, one built on the belief that everyone deserved a chance to reclaim their dignity. But with every victory came its own set of challenges. The city's power structure began to take notice of the growing number of people standing tall together. Officials who had long ignored the marginalized population started to feel threatened by the sudden movement. One evening, as Aurora and Victor met with a group of supporters to discuss future plans, an unexpected visitor arrived, a tall, well-dressed man with a cold, calculating gaze. His name was Richard Lawson, a prominent businessman known for his charitable donations, but there was something unsettling in his eyes as he addressed the group. "I've heard about what you're doing here," Richard said, his voice smooth and persuasive. "Helping the forgotten is a noble cause, but there are risks. You need support, influence, resources. I'm offering my assistance on one condition." Aurora's instincts told her to be wary, but she stayed silent, listening as Victor carefully studied the man. "What condition?" Victor asked, his voice cautious but firm. Richard smiled. "You expand your network. But on my terms. I can make your efforts reach even more people, but you'll need to adhere to a few of my requests in return. I think you'll find it a small price to pay." Aurora exchanged a glance with Victor, sensing the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Victor spoke first. "We didn't start this to be controlled. We're doing this for people, not for power or influence." Richard's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "I understand your hesitation, but the truth is, people like you cannot afford to be idealistic forever. Change needs resources. You need to think bigger." After a long silence, Victor's voice broke through. "We won't compromise what we've built. The dignity of those we help comes first." Richard paused, his gaze cold. "Then you'll do this without the support of people like me. But don't forget, change often comes at a price." With that, he turned and left, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Aurora could feel the tension in the room. The threat of what Richard represented was real, but she knew deep down that giving in to his demands would only undermine everything they were fighting for. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Word spread about their refusal to compromise, and while they faced some opposition from powerful figures who tried to block their efforts, the support they garnered from the people was overwhelming. The forgotten began to speak up, to demand their rights, and Aurora and Victor stood as their champions, their voices louder and stronger than ever before. But even as their influence grew, new challenges emerged. A group of outsiders, looking to exploit the vulnerable for profit, began targeting the people in their network, offering them false promises of wealth in exchange for loyalty. Aurora and Victor knew they couldn't let this happen. One night, after a long meeting, Aurora turned to Victor, her resolve unwavering. "We need to confront them before they get any stronger. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything we've worked for." Victor nodded, his expression hardening. "We'll do it together. But we have to be smart. We've built something real here. It's not just about surviving anymore, it's about creating something sustainable, something that will last." The battle for the future of the forgotten had just begun, and they knew that, in the end, it would be the strength of their unity, their dignity, and their unwavering belief in each other that would carry them through. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, they knew that no matter what came next, they had already created a movement that would never be forgotten. As the last strains of the grand wedding music echo, the scene shifts to the dimly lit underground shelter. Aurora, her clothes worn and faded, stands at the front of a group of survivors. Her eyes, once filled with dreams of a life of wealth and comfort, now reflect the harsh reality of their world. Victor, with his signature scruffy appearance, stands beside her, a silent protector. The once carefree artist, who had lived in the chaos of the streets, is now a beacon of survival for those around him. The underground system of barter, trading items of sentimental value for basic needs, has become their new world. Aurora takes a deep breath, her voice trembling as she addresses the group, though her words are strong. "We used to think wealth was everything, that gold, jewels, and titles would bring happiness. But now I see that it was all just a mask, hiding what really matters. In this dark shelter, with nothing but the clothes on our backs, we've learned that survival is more valuable than any luxury. Every item we trade has a story, a memory. Our worth is measured by what we give, not by what we own. Victor, who had always been the silent one, steps forward. His voice is gruff, but there's a warmth to it. It's about the people, or the ones you can count on when everything else falls away. I never needed riches. All I ever needed was a reason to fight something worth fighting for. Aurora nods, understanding now that wealth is fleeting, but the bonds formed in the face of hardship are everlasting. As the group gathers around, exchanging stories and bartered goods, Aurora's mind drifts back to the wedding, an event that now seems like a distant dream, a hollow memory of a life that never truly belonged to her. Aurora spends the next few weeks in the underground shelter, the weight of her former life slowly sinking into her bones. Each day, she notices the subtle changes in herself, how her posture has softened, her once pristine appearance now roughened by the realities of survival. The idealized version of herself that once dreamed of grand parties and glamorous weddings feels distant, almost like someone else's life. Victor, always calm and composed, is a constant reminder of the world she never fully understood, the world of the streets, of living without the comfort of wealth or status. He doesn't see any need to explain his past or apologize for it. He simply lives in the moment, focused on what is needed to survive. There's something undeniably magnetic about his way of being, and Aurora finds herself drawn to it more each day. The barter system flourishes in their community. Aurora becomes an unlikely leader, using her knowledge of high society to help navigate the intricate negotiations between traders. Her insight into human nature, once honed in ballrooms and gala events, now proves invaluable in ensuring the shelter's survival. People begin to respect her not for her beauty or lineage, but for her sharp mind and the empathy she extends to every individual. Victor, on the other hand, thrives in the rawness of the shelter. He uses his artistic skills to craft tools and art out of whatever scraps they can find, creating beautiful things out of what others would discard. His creations become prized items in the barter system, with each piece carrying not only value but a piece of his soul. One evening, as the shelter's makeshift bonfire flickers in the corner of their underground haven, Aurora sits beside Victor, lost in thought. She watches him sketch a new design for a tool, his hands steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "Do you ever miss it?" she asks, breaking the silence. "The old world, the life we had before all of this?" Victor stops his work for a moment, his eyes softening. "I miss parts of it, sure. There was beauty in the simplicity of it all. But I've found beauty here too. People here, they don't pretend to be something they're not. They're raw, real. I think that's what I've been searching for all along." Aurora leans back, staring at the dim light of the fire. The flicker of the flames feels like the last piece of the world she once knew, slowly burning away. "You know," she says, her voice barely above a whisper, "I used to think I was trapped in a gilded cage. But maybe the real cage was the illusion of that life, of that wealth. It kept me from seeing what truly matters. I can breathe here, Victor. I can breathe, even if it's hard." Victor turns to her, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. "We're all trying to breathe, Aurora. Some of us just have to do it deeper." As the fire dies down and the night wraps them in its cool embrace, Aurora finds herself at peace, no longer defined by her past, but by the present. By the choices she's made. By the people she's learned to care about. The wedding that once felt like the end of a story now seems like the beginning of something new, a life that's worth living. A life where survival has more meaning than any diamond, and where the strength of community and love outweighs the value of any material possession.